So, President Donald Trump and his America First policy continuing to shake the global pack. And I mean, seriously impacts the global pack. On one end, the decision to freeze the USAID and foreign aid is forcing the Caribbean nations, but also Africa and the entire global south, to look inwards for solutions. On the other side, his anti-DEI measures continue to cause an upheaval in the United States, where you have Black people and organizations such as the NAACP deciding to figure out ways to leverage their economic strength. So I guess the question here is this just a temporary phase that will disappear once Donald Trump's presidency is over? Or is Donald Trump really catalyzing a sentiment that will kind of urge the entire global pack to go towards a more sustainable structural changes for the long term? Well, those are some of the issues we'll discuss today and some more. So fasten your seatbelts, let's dive in, and let's get to work. The AfriKili family and Global PAC Nation, welcome to another edition of the Global PAC Show. This is your host, Tony Mfumu Simba. It's a great pleasure for me to once again be in front of you on this Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. Before we get started with our discussion topics on this live, let me just take the time to thank every single one of you. Let me thank all of you who have been supporting us ever since we decided to launch this new live format called the Global PAC Show. So thank you very much for all of you who subscribe, those of you who like, those of you who share. Much appreciated. And for all of those of you who have not done so yet, let me just ask you to please hit the subscribe button and help this entire community grow. Join the community, be part of the conversation, because without you, we cannot grow. But I have no doubt that in 2025, this platform, the Global PAC Show, will take over, will take off, and will, meet all the goals that we've set forward. So be part of this conversation. So again, I ask you to take the time and just hit the subscribe button. Only takes a second, but you'll help this platform and the entire community grow as we build bridges and strong coalitions in the entire Global PAC, the Global Pan-African Diaspora and Global Pan-African communities. So there you have it. So, all right, so two topics today. We'll talk about the impact of those anti-DEI measures and what's happening with the NAACP and so on. But let's first start with the international landscape. Last week, I think we had two different discussions about the Trump's administration decision to freeze the foreign aid, all right, through the USAID or USAID, depending on how you call it. Well, that decision is continuing to have some serious impact across the world. But here's the deal. Beyond the pain that is causing in many countries around the global pack, but just countries in general around the world that have relied on that foreign aid, there are tremendous opportunities here to step away and move away from the reliance that had been developed over the decades by this aid. And I will touch a bit upon that. But just real quick, for those of you who might wonder what the USAID is or USAID, just very quickly, just a few numbers. So the USAID is essentially an agency that was created in 1961, and it stands for, so USAID simply stands for United States Agency for International Development. So it's essentially an arm of the U.S. government, the State Department, that administers funds for different programs, for development programs, anti-poverty programs, health programs, education programs in many different nations around the world. The budget of this institution is somewhere around $40 to $50 billion per year. And when you look at the entire foreign aid, it's not even 1% of the entire annual budget of the U.S. federal government. It's actually estimated somewhere around 0.6%. All right, so 0.6% is what we're we're talking about here. And so, yeah, I mean, significant in some measure, right? Because countries have developed a reliance on that. So just a few additional numbers here. When we talk about sub-Saharan Africa, all right, so all the countries of sub-Saharan Africa, USAID spent somewhere close to just under $7 billion for the whole year. So we're talking about all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So the aid portion of that was, again, around $7 billion, a little less. If we look at the Caribbean, so understand that the Caribbean, we're talking about a 50 nation block here, right? Of the CARICOM and so on, so the Caribbean community. So it is somewhere around $2.5 billion. Okay. So it is, in a sense, not that significant given the amount of countries that are involved here. Nevertheless, there are some very critical programs that have come to rely on the USAID funding or U.S. foreign aid funding over the years. So if I look at a sector like health, because that's a lot of the discussion over the last few weeks when, Donald Trump announced the 90-day freeze of the USAID and, foreign aid assistance, a big emphasis had been placed on aid. On the health sector. And that's, I think, right on point, because that's one of the sectors where the changes can be very dramatic and very rapidly. Because when you deal with medication, people's health, obviously when you pull away that aid, you can very quickly see the impact of that. So that's why the health sector typically comes up as people are discussing the impact of USAID around the world. Like, for example, I look at countries like, if I look at sub-Saharan Africa, right, we'll also talk about the Caribbean a little later, but if I look at sub-Saharan Africa, you have like the top 3 countries that have been receiving aid from USAID in the health sector. You have country number 1, Nigeria. You have country number 2, Tanzania. Country number 3, Uganda. So Nigeria is somewhere around $368 million. All right, that was last year. Countries like Tanzania, about $337 million. Countries like Uganda, about $295 million. Or just somewhere around $300 million. You can average that. That's about what those countries receive yearly to fund health initiative for their citizens. This is significant. All right. So I do not want at any point here to undermine or underestimate the impact of this USAID. It is significant. So some lives really depend on that. If we look at AIDS, because a lot of discussion we're centering around AIDS, it's specifically what's called the ARV drugs. All right, so those are the life-saving antiretroviral drugs. Drugs that help prevent the manifestation of AIDS. Well, a lot of the programs across many different countries in sub-Saharan Africa have come to rely on this USAID funding to provide ARVs. I'm looking at here, for example, there's a program called PEPFAR. So that's PEPFAR, PEPFAR. All right. So which stands essentially for the President Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. In sub-Saharan Africa, or I look at a country like South Africa, which was receiving about $400 million for the PEPFAR programs, which is administered directly by NGOs or nonprofits in those countries. So all these numbers here to say that we're talking about a lot of millions. So when we freeze, when the Trump administration decides to freeze the USAID funding to other nations because they're advancing the America First philosophy of that government, well, those have real impact on the ground. All right, we're talking about, again, millions upon millions of dollars of treatment and medication and so on that people relied on to save their lives, that suddenly the rugs get pulled underneath them. So that is significant. And you look at the Caribbean, you have a lot of relief efforts. We just had a hurricane not that long ago. We have, I remember when the earthquake happened in Haiti. So those countries come to rely a lot on the aid. Now, here's the deal. Although this is significant, right? The fact that the rug gets pulled underneath these nations that came to rely on it. Personally, as I mentioned last week, I think this is actually a tremendous opportunity for these nations to actually develop or step away from the reliance on this aid. Because let's get something straight. This aid, which gets promoted as for the American people, I'm sorry, from the American people, because that's actually the slogan of USAID. It is from the American people, is really not free money. You have to understand that these quote unquote handouts are designed to advance American interests across the world. And I will explain myself. By the end of this video, you will fully understand how, in a way, USAID is a perverse incentive, in a sense. And this aid, again, is to advance American interests. And so to me, the fact that Donald Trump, with his America First policy, is wanting to communicate what I would call a populist message to his base and the people, saying that, you know what, we shouldn't worry about the issues in other countries because we're wasting so much money. Let's deal with our own issues within the United States. That's a populist message, because really, technically speaking, the money that is being spent is to advance American interest. But be that as it may, that stepping away is creating a vacuum, will create a vacuum over time. And that is an opportunity for countries in the Caribbean, countries in sub-Saharan Africa, countries across the Global PAC to actually start developing their own strength to step away from that aid. Because here's one thing you want to understand. Let me actually put a map on the screen that maybe will help you illustrate what I'm talking about. Okay, so this map here, it's a map of the US military bases across the world. So let me bring it up on the screen very quickly. Again, this will help you understand the point that I'm making here, that this USAID that gets communicated, right, as benevolent assistant for all these poor countries around the world that we're trying to help, really it's some kind of a quid pro quo. It is fund that is there, that is in a way that has been coerced over decades. Decades is a French word for decades. Over decades, on the basis of enforced, coerced by the presence of military force. So here's the map I wanted to talk about. Okay, so this map is a map of US bases around the world. And I'm kind of hiding my face so you can see, so I can make it bigger. Otherwise, it would be too small for you to see. So essentially, all the red points that you're seeing around the world, those are US bases. All right. So the United States government has over 750 bases spread in over 80 countries around the world. All right, over 750 military bases. So all those red dots that you see. All right. And you might be interested in knowing, so when we talk about the military budget of the United States, the US as a nation, its own budget is more than the next 8 countries combined. All right, so the US spends a lot of money on its military. A lot of money. It is somewhere around $780 billion. That's the US military budget, $780 billion. The next 8 countries combined, we're talking about China, India, Russia, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France. They overall spend less for the military budget than what the United States spent. So let that sink in. The US military budget is more than the next 8 countries combined. And so you look at this map, look at how spread it is around the world. So now ask yourself the question, if it doesn't already make sense to you. What is the purpose of having all these military bases around the world? You look at Africa, Military presence all over the place of military bases. You look at the Middle East, you look at Latin America. Obviously, known in Russia, you can understand why. Known in China, you can obviously understand why. But so look at this map. All these military bases. Why? All right, let me take the map away. I think the point has been made here. Let's eliminate the map. Give me one quick second. Okay. Now, as you saw all those countries, now let's bring in USAID or USAID. USAID has its base in over 60 countries around the world, but works in dozens more with a staff of maybe about 10,000 people. But USAID typically does not implement programs itself. So when we talk about all these health initiatives, all these education initiatives, all these relief initiatives in the Caribbean and so on, that money is actually given to what's called implementing partners on the ground. Okay, so you have organizations that are implementing partners receive funding or money from the USAID and all these agencies, and those implementing partners are the ones implementing the programs on the ground. But again, you have all those military bases, and then you have all those USAID operations around all those countries around the world. You have to understand that when the United States come and approaches those nations, historically, it has been in a coercive manner, in an interventionist manner, putting pressure on those governments to behave in a certain way to receive the funding on the back end. And in the event where, as we've seen in Latin America, even many African countries over time through history, governments that tended to resist, well, there was a removal. So there was what's called regime change. That is that has happened throughout Nicaragua, you name it, in Latin America, African countries. So you have aid that is dangled in front, that has military pressure behind it for you to accept it, but then you accept it. As a result, there's a certain dependency that has been created in those nations over the decades. To me, I kind of see it a bit as imagine a drug dealer that understand the dependency that the drug will create, but continue advancing that and putting it forward, knowing that without it, there will be a tremendous withdrawal. But actually forcing you to take it through the strength of the military. That's a caricature, but that is how this whole aid system became to unfold. The populist message again of Donald Trump given to the U.S. Population, to his base, does not explain that, right? There is a sense that why should we again deal with the issues of people around the world when we have our own issues in the United States? That's the populist message. But understand that the underpinning of this is maintaining a certain economic dominance, a certain power around the world. That's what the military also is for. As a matter of fact, this aid, if you really look at the impact on the ground, granted, as I said, when it comes to the health sector and so on, the removal of that aid creates a cash flow crunch that will undoubtedly result in immediate lives being lost, unfortunately. Nevertheless, you will not find a single country that ended up being developed on the basis of this aid coming from USA. There's not a single country that has been developed, all right, that has been become independent economically on the basis of that aid. That aid is not designed to develop nations. So quite frankly, if Donald Trump will continue pushing this America First agenda, there will be some resistance within the apparatus, trust me, because there's some economic interests that are deeply rooted that the U.S. cannot just step away from, whether Donald Trump knows it or he will be reminded. right? By certain apparatus, as I said, whether it's from the mining sector, strategic mining. There's some geopolitical influence. There's the growth of the BRIC nations that I mentioned last week. The BRICS, so BRICS. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, but that has been expanding. Well, the opportunity that I see here is sort of encapsulated by, if you look at Andrew Holness, for example, the Prime Minister of Jamaica. I love what he said, right? Because there's the CARICOM, the Caribbean Community meeting that is about to begin. There's the agenda that was put forth. Well, now, given the tumult that is caused by Donald Trump's America First decisions, well, new items were added on that agenda, namely immigration issues, security issues, and so on. But Andrew Holness, said, sure, there will be a cash flow impact, right, of the suspension of all this aid, but that presented tremendous opportunity for Caribbean nations to develop less of a dependence on foreign aid, and the resources are available. I also like what Uhuru Kenyatta said in Kenya, the former president. He said, for all the people who might be crying that the U.S. is cutting their aid, why are you crying? After all, you don't pay taxes in the U.S. Why should Donald Trump continue paying? I like that approach in a sense. It is true that those beneficiaries do not pay taxes in the U.S., although, as I said, they indirectly pay taxes because the U.S. tremendously benefits from all that activity around the world to maintain its way of life. Take away that military presence, all those bases around the world, I can assure you the American way of life will fall. Economically, the same people that are impacted by Donald Trump populism are the ones that will be impacted by that, but that will not happen overnight anyways. So anyways, as Uhuru Kenyatta said, so there is tremendous opportunity here, right, for all these countries to step away from that dependency and develop more resiliency and more sustainable development in the long term. Now, I talked about the lack of development. One thing you also see is that many of these nations that receive this foreign aid, USAID and so on, most of the money anyways gets hoarded by some of the elites in those nations. And there's heavy corruption within the nations that receive the funds. And USAID knows that. There's a lot of corruption within the system. So the money does not even, for the most part, go to the base to really where it's needed the most. Yes, again, you cannot discount the lives that are being saved in the health sector and so on, but there's a lot of corruption in that sector. As I mentioned before in my previous life, there's a time when I was a senior executive in an international organization, an international NGO, that was implementing disaster relief, emergency, and also poverty alleviation development programs around the world, in the Caribbean, in Asia, in Africa. I can tell you that in that environment, in that sector, there's a lot of corruption. So cutting that aid in the long term is actually beneficial for those nations, in my sense. So yeah, I think that Donald Trump's approach here, like African nations and Caribbean nations, should not also just consider that or passively wait for this administration to end, and then say that it will be business as usual in the next administration if it's not J.D. Vance or another person who espouses Donald Trump's policy. No, should not have that passive approach. Rather, it should be a very aggressive approach to say, all right, this vacuum being created, let us actively work to eliminate that dependency and leverage our resources strategically so that we might stand firm and actually strengthen ourselves economically. The resources are there. If you look at Guyana, for example, in the Caribbean, tremendous oil reserves, right, that have been discovered. And rest assured, the U.S. does not want Guyana to be looking at China and so on as potential partner to develop all those fields. But hey, look, Guyana and the Caribbean, this is an opportunity to really start looking at different partners on how to develop their resources strategically and intelligently. The BRICS nation, this is an opportunity. Donald Trump during his campaign was talking about BRICS nations being the enemy in a sense because they were talking about de-dollarizing the world's economy. So in other words, stepping away from the dollar, talking about China being there and so on. But here are opportunities again, because this America First policy will create a lot of blind spot and opportunities to step in. The same goes for Africa. With all the tremendous resources that the continent has, here's an opportunity to develop those resources, to develop those nations and strengthen those nations economically, politically, militarily speaking. Tremendous opportunity that I see here. A lot of pain, yes, in the short term, but in the long term, tremendous opportunity. But we need to be intelligent, and we need to really grab the bull by the horn, and we need to remember one of the pillars of this platform, which is political participation, because we need political organization, we need pressure mechanism, because understand that countries that have corrupted political system will certainly not change by themselves. You need certain pressure mechanisms put on. I look at remittances, for example, here, in terms of money that's flowing from, say, the United States, Europe, and so on into African nations, into Caribbean nations. Remittances are a significant portion of assistance in those nations, right? People with family members in America and so on. I mean, I'm looking at my case, for example, me being in the United States of America, having family in Africa and so on. I look at people with families in the Caribbean. We send a lot of money, right, to support relatives and so on back into our countries of origin. Well, those remittances can be a pressure mechanism towards the political governance in the countries in the Global PAC. Now, of course, I don't know if you've followed this, but the Trump administration was floating the idea of taxing remittances. They're looking at Latin America, saying, okay, all these illegal, undocumented people cross the border to come and work and then send the money back home and so on. And they're saying, that's they're utilizing us, or they're floating an idea of taxing that. Again, populism, because those people actually help this nation more than the other way around. If you think about it, it is oftentimes cheap labor. I'm talking about undocumented immigrants. Cheap labor. It is people that contribute into the Social Security fund and will not even be able to partake into that, and so on and so forth. So the U.S. benefits tremendously from those people. So taxing the remittances, that's just populism. But nevertheless, that flow of money from the U.S. towards the Caribbean, towards Africa, represent tremendous power. So if we organize ourselves intelligently, we can put in place mechanisms that will put the necessary pressure on the governments in those different nations to ensure that they operate over time in a way that is for the best advantage or the well-being of their population, because that is not necessarily the case. And quite frankly, if we do not seize this moment, this opportunity, it will be business as usual. The Trump administration will end, and many of those countries will continue the way they are. But again, I see a tremendous opportunity here to go in. And talking about immigration, like the Caribbean are facing the pinch of that also. I was looking at some report where it is estimated that about 15,000 people, like Caribbean nationals, are awaiting deportation orders. And Jamaica being the leading nation with about maybe 5,000 flights, 5,000 people expected. So flights already being booked. So there's that influx of people coming back into the Caribbean that will be deported. You consider all this. I mean, it really behooves countries in the Global PAC, right? The Global Pan-African communities in the Caribbean, even in Africa, to really reorganize themselves and use this as an impulse for once and for all, step away from this dependency and develop sustainable strength so that tomorrow those nations can be able to sit around the negotiation table, around, the powers that be, and then we can move towards a more equitable world, a world where actually we can truly discuss as equals. Over time, that is possible, but something drastic definitely needs to happen. So that's my talk about the USAID freeze. So instead of sorrow and crying, no, we need to take that with defiance, all right? Resiliency, and rebuke this notion that those countries are just getting handouts for their own benefits. No, those countries need to understand what they have and really, again, eliminate that dependency. All right, so let's move on to the second topic I had in mind for today, which was the continued impact of the anti-DEI measures in the United States. All right, so interestingly enough, the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which was founded in 1909 by prominent figures such as W.E.B. Du Bois, so William Edgar Du Bois, the first African American to obtain his PhD from Harvard University. One of my many heroes, a staunch Pan-Africanist who ended up relocating to Ghana at the end of his life and ended up dying and being buried in Ghana. So I've spoken at length about him throughout this channel. But anyway, so the NAACP, the organization, came up with a list a few days ago. It is a list that is, in a sense, some might say pushing for the boycott of companies that are not supporting DEI initiatives. Others may say just highlighting companies that actually support DEI initiatives. So that report, that list that the NAACP brought out is praising companies like Costco, Apple, and so on. As a matter of fact, if you're interested, the article, let me just give you the title. I did not load the image, but I actually strongly recommend that you read that article. There's some interesting insight in that article. So it's an article by the AP Associated Press. So if you go to apnews.com, all right, and the article is titled, "The NAACP lists companies that dump DEI in its tactical spending guide for Black Americans." I'll tell you what, I did not initially load it, but I think it would be important for us out there to, when you get a chance, to read this article. There's a lot of good insight in that article. So let me see if I can load it real quick on the screen here. Yes, all right. Fantastic. I think we should be able to see it now. NAACP. Yes, there it is. Okay, so this article, let me see here. Okay, I should have loaded it initially, but anyways. Okay, there it is. So yeah, so the NAACP lists companies that dump DEI in its tactical spending guide for Black Americans. Okay, so I will not read the article here, but I was just putting it up here for you to see. So when you get a chance, look up this article, all right, from the AP News. So this is interesting. Why am I even bringing this up here? All right, so I'm going to take off the screen. Well, it is projected that the spending power of Black people in the United States would get to over $2 trillion by 2030. That is significant spending power. And so the NAACP here I think is correct to identify ways for Black people in the United States to leverage their economic power. Nevertheless, in my opinion, this should go beyond DEI. DEI is okay. I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you know, the Trump administration has been working hard to eliminate all DEI measures. I've spoken at length about how actually DEI, the scope goes beyond just racial equality, right? So DEI englobes a lot of non-racial injustices. We have LGBTQ issues. We have many different injustices. And so some have argued that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, Black people as a group were not the ones that were benefiting the most from DEI. And so, as such, I think that the NAACP should, yes, leverage the economic power of Black people, but look beyond DEI. In my sense, it should rather be a push to identify Black-owned businesses and really advocate for Black people to prioritize spending with Black-owned businesses. That to me is more important. And let me explain myself. I've heard the arguments often that, well, people who advocate for spending in Black-owned businesses, for Black people to direct their dollars into Black banks, Black businesses, is a racist approach. In this century, we should go beyond that. I will disagree with that, in a sense that when we look at the economic disparities, right, the Black wealth, racial wealth gap in the United States of America, it is a very significant gap. I have a series of shows on this channel. I encourage you to go and revisit that if you're interested in the topic. But one way in which we can strengthen our economic strength as a people in the United States and across the world as a global PAC community is, yes, beyond the education, beyond, you know, going into the middle class through education, home ownership, and so on, but supporting our businesses is key. It does not make sense that when you look at Black people as a group, that the dollars earned by Black people spend the least amount of time within the Black community and gets diluted. That does not happen with other communities. So here, by systematically incentivizing Black people to identify Black-owned business and supporting Black-owned businesses, well, that is in a way helping create more millionaires and maybe more billionaires within the Black community and increasing our overall economic strength. As I like to say, money talks and BS walks and bullshit walks. You need a certain economic strength. One of the pillars of AfriKili and the Global PAC, one of the three pillars, is also economic advancement, finances. So we need to support our businesses. It is critical. So when I look at what the NAACP is doing here, really emphasizing companies that support DEI and separating them from the companies that do not support DEI, sure. I mean, I don't necessarily condemn that, but I would love to see an added incentive, and this goes beyond just the combating Donald Trump anti-DEI measures, but we have to look in the grand scheme of things, addressing issues like the racial wealth gap and really, you know, encouraging Black people to spend in Black-owned businesses. So it would be interesting to have such a campaign. It has been done in the past, but to have the same energy, the same strength for institutions such as the NAACP to really, really promote Black-owned businesses. On this platform, this is something we will gradually do as we go forward. We will advertise Black-owned businesses. I will really encourage this community to support Black-owned businesses, and so we can really, again, raise that economic strength within our community. I think that is important because the more we can be strong economically speaking, then the more we can influence the politics, the more we can influence the policies, right? The more we can dictate many of the terms. But without money, essentially, it's hard to have significant political influence. We can organize ourselves politically, that is also needed. But whether it's the civil rights movement that was done in the 60s or more recent activism, without a strong financial and economic position, it is hard to advance your interests and your causes. You need that. I mean, just look at even the U.S. as a whole. If you just take the U.S. foreign policy, the way it's influencing what's happening around the world on the global scene, how the U.S. today is called the world police and so on. Well, that is possible because the U.S. is putting the means behind it, like a big military budget. That's money that has to be allocated to that, right? So you look at it now on a more micro level, within this country, within the United States of America, it is important to support Black-owned businesses so that the Global PAC as a whole becomes stronger and can influence policies. And if you look outside of the United States, you look at in the Caribbean, you look at Africa, well, then, yes, we have remittances for here, but also advancing businesses, promoting entrepreneurship, good governance with the rule of law in those countries so that entrepreneurs can flourish is also necessary. So that's where I want to end the show for today. So as a summary of what we've discussed, right? The changes that are unfolding on the political scene in the United States have a heavy impact in the world as large. Have a heavy impact. And it's influencing state of affairs. I mean, I was just looking at even the European Union, for example. Now the European Union is calling emergency meetings because the U.S. is appending the whole order of things, seeing how they can raise their military and so on. But that in a way was also, in my opinion, I think, the European Union underestimated what Donald Trump was saying, or maybe did not anticipate that Trump would have won the election, quite frankly. Because many of the things Trump is doing now, he was saying that during his presidency, right? In terms of how the Europeans were treating him badly, and he would do this with Europeans and so on, how Ukraine would be, trying to negotiate with Russia. So I think that Europe as a bloc did not take many of those threats seriously. And so when Trump won the election and now is implementing his version of America First, now Europe is scrambling, right? And trying to come up with solutions to alleviate that. Well, for us as a global PAC, it is also that opportunity to really take measures that will allow us to strengthen ourselves in a sustainable way, even post the Trump administration. That is possible, but that will require unity. All right? Strong unity that will require coalitions, which is what the Global PAC platform advances. I will close with our quote, as has become the norm in our show, our platform. I always like ending with a quote to hopefully motivate us and allowing us to end on a positive note. The quote here comes from Stokely Carmichael, who later renamed himself Kwame Ture. He is the activist in the 1960s, Mr. Black Panther, Black Power himself, who ended up relocating to Ghana and changed his name to Kwame Ture, because Stokely Carmichael is the name he was given when he was born in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. And so since today our show was, we mentioned the Caribbean a lot, so I wanted to end with a quote by somebody from the Caribbean. And so this quote here, I believe you should be able to see it on the screen here. Yes. Is it on the screen? Yes, it is on the screen. All right, so the quote says, "In struggle, one not only fights against something, injustice, oppression, but one must struggle for something equally real but positive. That's the other part of the equation. I really, really love this quote, because this quote emphasizes action. This quote emphasizes one of the sayings I like bringing forth in this platform, where it's not just about complaining, but advancing. Action is needed. And so when Stokely Carmichael here says, one must struggle for something equally real but positive, that's really the other part of the equation. So as we're talking about issues of injustice, right, we're talking about bringing more equality. We're talking about strengthening our communities, our coalitions. We have to do it through action. We cannot just complain about the state of injustices, but offering a way forward. And so with this platform, AfriKili and the Global PAC, the way forward for us is global coalitions, strong coalitions. So if I invite you to join this platform, hit the subscribe button, only takes a second. Become part of the community, part of this coalition. If not AfriKili or Global PAC, then just find another platform that works for you. So on that note, thank you very much for tuning in today. Remember, we are strong, capable, and beautiful people. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And more importantly, we are the Global PAC. So until next time, peace be with you. Asante sana, which means thank you in Swahili. And remember, we are the Global PAC. Thank you very much.